Welcome to Igniting Imagination. I'm your host, Lisa Greenwood, and today we're kicking off a new season with a conversation rooted in a compelling idea from our friend and colleague, Reverend Sue Phillips. What if ministry is a kind of technology? She explores this in her recent essay, Religious Leaders as Technologists, which you can read on our website, and I definitely hope you will, because it is so good and so important for today. Sue will be joining me as co-host for this season, but today she's here as our guest, alongside my colleague and friend, the Reverend Dr. Blair Thompson. Sue will be joining me as co-host for this season. But today she's here as our guest, alongside my colleague, the Reverend Dr. Blair Thompson. And together they will help us open up the questions that Sue's piece raises for the church and for spiritual leaders navigating this moment. Sue is on the founding team of the Workshop for Emotional and Spiritual Technology. She's also a former denominational executive and a longtime spiritual entrepreneur herself, helping bridge ancient wisdom and modern innovation. And Blair served congregations in small-town Kansas, downtown Dallas, and suburban Richardson, Texas, before joining the team of Texas Methodist Foundation and Wesleyan Impact Partners in 2020. She now serves as our Chief Learning and Innovation Officer. We're going to have fun today as we explore how ancient practices can become fresh tools, how leaders can respond to real human longing, and what it might mean to think like ancient technologists today. So let's jump in. Welcome, Sue.
Hi, Lisa.
And welcome, Blair.
Hello. So good to be with you on this side of the microphone, I guess. Is that how you say it? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be fun, really. So we're going to jump in right there at the beginning of Sue's piece. Sue, you name a longing, that deep, unnamed ache that first pulled you toward the spiritual life. And so as you think about longing then, but also now in this moment, what feels newly true about longing? And I'm thinking both about personally and as you think about the leaders that you accompany. And so I'm asking Sue, but Blair, I really want you to chime in too. Yeah. Longing.
Well, on a personal level, I feel essentially the same longing I did on the cusp of divinity school so many years ago, but I have a lot more patience for it now. I'm not experiencing the longing for belonging as an itch that could ever be scratched, but as a lifestyle, essentially, to live in the presence of that longing and to give it its due, basically. So I have now a middle-aged person's patience with the fundamental experience of longing. It feels
so as kind
solid.
of a constant companion kind of thing? Is that what?
I think so, on some level, as a constant companion, but not in the irredeemable element, but in an orientation towards something, maybe a leaning in towards something that I'll never quite reach. It's actually quite beautiful. I experience it as a worthy companion, in all honesty.
I hear in that a kind of drawing toward life and people and experiences as opposed to a lacking that leaves you kind of despairing. I mean, that's what I'm hearing in what you're describing.
Very well said. Yeah, it's more of a leaning into a way of seeing the world and an acknowledgement of what it means to be at least this human, which is always living in the gap between how I wish I were and how I am, the world I wish were there and the world that actually is. And there's a lot of longing in that, a lot of kind of an engine for longing, if you will. But now I experience that in a peaceful way. Yeah. What about you? What about you, Blair?
Oh my goodness. I love your answer, Sue. So articulate and beautiful. So, I think I sort of had a similar reaction on, I think the longing never goes away. And I think that longing for me has often been for depth of connection both with the divine and with community that is authentic and real, and with my own sense of true self. So I think there's that constant longing. And, I think professionally, that longing has looked like a real desire for the church to, I guess for lack of a better way to put it, do better, church, in terms of meeting the moments and sort of being a real means of grace for the needs of the moment, which certainly are all about longing. I think, the other part of your question was, what are we seeing in leaders? And I think it's a very similar longing for spaces where they can be themselves, for the church to lean into its mission beyond sort of the consumerist draw of attractional model that they're always trying to keep up with. There's sort of this desire for authenticity and for a theology that speaks to this moment, which is about grace and belonging and goodness in the world. So yeah, all of that for me sort of paints a picture of longing, but ultimately is, I think, deeply rooted in kind of this real desire for authenticity, if you will, spaces where there's a real opportunity for connection.
So it's interesting to frame. I hadn't anticipated this, but to frame this conversation and this work of ancient technologies lived today, and we're going to get into that. If we frame that in the notion that longing is not something to be fixed so that we never experience it again, but we frame the conversation in terms of longing being a companion, a kind of constant companion that leads us into every relationship, every moment with curiosity and desire for goodness, wholeness, relationship, the divine, all of that, then the role of the church becomes different. Not to be the fixer,
right,
that makes longing go away, but actually helps us live into this authenticity, this belonging, this longing for life and wholeness and relationship with God and with each other. That's a different way to think about the church's work, I think.
Totally. And that, I'm thinking of Anderson Cooper, who I really adore on multiple levels. He's wonderful, brilliant, and he has really hit on this need in our world around a space for grief. And if you're not familiar, his podcast is All There Is. And I think it's such a great illustration of what you're talking about, that people have a longing for their grief to have space to be held with others. That's it. It's not for their grief to be fixed, but it's actually just that they can be, and to, to sit with it with others. And so it's in some ways, he's now created this whole community, by the way. He started out with simply podcast. It was from his own kind of personal longing to be in touch with his grief. So he created this podcast, and now he's got a whole community. And like Thursday nights at 9:00 Eastern time, he's logging on and the community is joining him. So I say that to say that's an example of a place where the church, decades ago might have been the space for that. And now people are finding it in these other places, such as Anderson's providing here.
Yeah, I want to see the church of living in the meantime. Forget like Trinity Church anymore. I want to see what a church built around helping people live in the meantime would look like. The church of unanswered longings. What if we really oriented around these spaces that people actually are very articulate about once you just ask them? We're going to get into that, I'm sure, a little bit later. But those longings are archetypal, they're knowable, they're companionable, and the all the resources we have at our disposal are uniquely good at addressing them. So it's good to take heart.
Perfect tee-up, if you will, for exactly what you're talking about, I think, in the article and in your piece, is this notion of ancient technologies and that the church is full of them.
Mm-hmm.
We have in our toolkit, if you will, rituals, patterns, practices to help us companion grief and longing and uh, possibility and all kinds of things. So when you two look at the church in perhaps in this moment, or even kind of at a big picture level, what ancient technologies feel especially alive or worth rediscovering right now?
Well, I think the person whose title is ancient technologist should start here. So, Sue, it's you.
I hope you won't consider this a flip answer, but I honestly think all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Say
the
more.
reason I think that is because any of the practices and ways that we've developed in the church, whether that's Methodist or Unitarian Universalist or a temple, any one of them that can be picked up and brought outside is a technology that's worthy of reinterpretation and new distribution. So when I think about the exigencies of the moment, I do think we're in a desperate age. Of course, this desperation, as I see it, bridges all divides. That may be the cause of the desperation. So this isn't a political desperation. It's just it's post-COVID. It's all of the deaths of despair. It's cultural trends. It's all the threats, existential and otherwise, that we feel all the time. And so I especially think it's a moment to reinterpret the practices that are about helping to witness, accompany, soothe, listen to. It's actually a time for the very simplest technologies: pastoral accompaniment, spiritual direction, the ability to ask a great question of another human and listen to the answer. It's easy to overlook the everyday currency of a caring community as spiritual technologies, but I'm going to say that those are the most important technologies right now. And one of the things I found in my current work is it's the simplest things that have found the most resonance in my workplace, where I've brought a number of these practices. They resonate so deeply because they work. They just work. And people are so bereft of access to them that it's actually not hard to make them sing. In exactly the same way, anyone who's ever preached knows that countless mediocre sermons have been redeemed by the quality of presence offered by the congregation.
Amen.
By the ears that are listening and by the evocational power of the brains and hearts that are listening to them. I mean, just all the time, right? The same thing is true of our practices. They don't have to be perfect. They don't have to be offered perfectly, because the people who are leaning towards them so want them to work and so badly need them to work that that's magic. That's grace. That's Holy Spirit. So the world is our oyster, if you will.
Yes. And Sue, this is why your piece is so important and why you articulating what you just did is so important. Because I think, and having been in the role of pastor in a local church, it's so easy to think, what's the new shiny thing that we need to be doing to get people in our doors at 11 o'clock on Sunday? And for that to be really the focus, when what you're talking about, Sue, is formation, using all the history, tools, rituals, practices that have long served the church. And it feels like oftentimes we discount them, as we don't even consider them as primary, as, hey, yeah, let's get some Bible studies going and let's have kind of an opportunity to get everybody's thoughts about a text. Like, we don't need a book study with a video from a scholar. Like, let's all get in the room together and let's light a candle and share in the moment of reflection, right? So I'm looking at the log in my eye here, by the way, when I say this, that I just feel like it's so hard in many ways because of the metrics that we've often used, right? That we do measure, you get what you measure. And so we focus so much on that Sunday morning gathering, which is not unimportant, but it's not the whole thing, right? And we've not brought in these elements of tradition, ritual, practice that are all around us, all available to us, and so perfect for this moment. Yeah.
Yeah. I've been thinking a lot since reading the paper about this notion of the difference between innovation as an idea and innovation as sort of the process, if you will. And 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 what you just said, Blair, made me think about this because I think we keep trying to come up with a new sparkly idea, like you said, like more programs, more, just cool gatherings and things that
Yeah.
will bring more people through our doors.
Yes.
As the church. And I'm all about more people knowing love and belonging and community and
Yep.
and being part of the movement of the Spirit. Like, I'm all about that. And I think when that's the question or the problem we're trying to solve or the question we're trying to answer, how do we get more people here?
Mhm.
Then I think we do focus on what's the new sparkly idea versus I think the invitation that you all are describing is an invitation to a process that is actually about formation,
Yes.
that is actually about how are we forming people
Mhm.
and how are we connecting people. And um,
I think we're being given an opportunity to
yeah,
test whether we've been telling the truth that what we really care about is souls instead of members and
Yes.
pledge units.
Yes.
yeah,
I mean, if it's true what we say about caring for souls,
Yeah.
then there's no reason not to turn ourselves inside out if we've been telling the truth. And I say this as somebody who's cared a great deal about pledge units and institutional maintenance and the church budget and my own self. I mean, I get it.
Mhm.
I really, really do. That's important. If we don't create sustainable ministries, then we will not be sustained. That's, of course, a reality. But
Yeah.
this is a time where some of the things we've been telling ourselves are being tested. And to my mind, that's one of them. Were we have we been telling the truth that our job
Yeah.
is to care for souls?
I mean, ouch. Have we been telling the truth? I mean, that's a really provocative and important question. Like, are we honest with ourselves about what it is we care about?
This has
And
been a really important question for me too, coming into tech,
Mhm.
because I carry a lot of the ambivalence and critique of tech that any sane person would.
Mhm.
I've really had to do a lot of talking to myself about, is this the world I want to be in? Are these the rules I want to play by? How am I, what happens when I accept these constraints along with all the opportunities? It's for me as just a human, it's extremely complex.
Yeah.
And as a vocational human who's trying to do my ministry in the world, it's extremely complex. But I'm applying a lesson in this space that I learned very early in my congregational ministry. One of the first things that I realized I've been so wrong about is I was telling myself a story prior to congregational ministry that my work would only be important if I served a lot of people.
Mhm.
And in congregational ministry, you guys affirm if you think this is right, you find out very quickly that, in fact, the real power of ministry is at a hospital bedside.
Yeah.
Or a graveside, or a living room visit, or the kindergartner who picks up your hand walking down
Mhm.
between the pews. All the currency of love in these communities is one-on-one. And so I'm mentioning that because I think another thing we tell ourselves is that volume is the only thing that matters. So, and that was a major fuel for me going into tech. But when I think about my colleagues in the world we're trying to build in the work,
Mhm.
I have really got to stay focused on the power of the one-on-one influence.
Hmm.
So my job in a lot of ways is to care for my colleagues so that they in turn can create something caring. And if we just, without in any way trying to make myself the hero of my own story, I do have to tell myself that that's sufficient.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways we all have to tell ourselves that it's sufficient to care for a soul and like to offer comfort. That's a worthy day, right?
Yes. Yes, and I'm so drawn to that, Sue, and so grateful for you articulating it. So I can go back and listen to it again and again. It's good. But we just finished a cohort where we had as our guests, facilitators, Cara and Andy Root. And Cara in particular is approaching pastoral life in the way you're describing. So she's been in her congregation. She has a book. We'll link it on the show notes or whatever. It's a great read because it's exactly it's playing out in practice what you're talking about, which is she's been in the same congregation for 17 years and it has not grown because they have not tried to grow it in 17 years. It's 50 people. It's always been about 50 people. They are loving each other through life and death. I think that's as simple as it can be said. The stories she tells are incredible about how they have loved each other and cared for each other. And in that loving and caring, all been formed as disciples of Jesus. But the way she orients her day, the question that she asks, the time that she spends, the leaders in the room, which are sort of middle judicatory leaders, were like, well, just so you know, we would look down on that, like in general, from their perspective, they look at that kind of way of pastoring and they don't see it as successful, if you will.
Yeah, it's small church. I'm using air quotes, it's small church. And as if we've forgotten what networked nodes look like, smaller groups of autonomously operating, connected groups is literally what the internet is. It's actually very, very small nodes doing their thing.
Sort of sorted, if you will, by algorithms and other things, but interesting. So it feels like this comes back to this notion of if the church's work is really about formation, forming souls, connecting souls to each other, if you will, people, in ways that bring about more love and more belonging and more grace in the world, and that these ancient technologies of listening, of caring, of coming alongside, of, rituals and practices and things that the church has, I'm not getting to my point very quickly here, but that this is actually about forming every human to do this, right? This is not on the role of the clergy. Like, because I can identify with what you were describing, what both of you have described in terms of pastoral ministry, and this notion that you want to reach more people because you want more people to know love and to have the experience of what it means to be part of community and then to be part of the witness of love in the world. And you want that. But if it's all reliant on me to be the person who makes that happen, right? One to many, then I'm actually missing the point. But if I'm forming people to do that in the world and with each other, because my guess is, though that church who worships on Sunday or whatever, however Cara measures that when she says it hasn't grown, my guess is their tentacles in their families, in their major relationships, in their neighborhoods, in their city. Like, my guess is those tentacles are deep and profound.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we don't necessarily have ways to measure that, but it's how do those formed disciples live their lives and witness in that way? Okay. So we've talked some about things that we lament about where the church has been and is, but I'm curious where you're seeing sort of new uses of ancient technologies in ways that are getting traction that are bringing hope and light? Yeah, you've given one really with Cara Root, but
well, Lisa, I think you should answer this question too. So just to say, let's make sure that we get your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, in a way that we need to hear examples from within the church, because we're not great at uplifting and sifting through the many stories that are out there around what's actually working. So hopefully listeners will leave this conversation today having a few great examples. And I know that you're seeing creative leaders doing creative things and communities that are built around them. So what are you seeing that's got the juice?
Let's see. I think one thing that comes to mind for me is, and it wasn't that, I just saw how you both did that to me. But one of the things I'm seeing that I don't have great words around, nor have I packaged it or, figured out the 1, 2, 3 steps or whatever. But I do think that there's something about the approach to ministry, to innovation, to, sort of doing new things in this moment that are really about the way some of these leaders that I think are doing it really well that I'm watching. It's the way they're doing it. So for instance, I think we have tended to think of entrepreneurs, innovators as sort of, they can be a little bit of an island out there. Like they're doing their own thing. It's lonely. They charge forward. But more and more, the folks that we're seeing, they're doing it in teams. They are not doing it alone.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and that's a whole different way to think about how we live into ministry, how we lead. It is to think, I will not do this alone. And we're seeing that in some really creative leaders and who even struggle. I mean, sometimes we'll invite someone onto a podcast and they're like, wait, but it's not just me, it's my team. Can I bring these other 3 people or these other 2 people? And we're like, makes for a hard podcast, but, or when we're recognizing as like our Lock innovative leaders, oh my gosh, the first thing they want to say is, I have not done this alone. Why are you recognizing, and so I think there's something about the way leaders today, especially some of our most innovative, are leaning into a team. And that can even be a congregation that sees themselves as part of a partnership or collaboration in a community. But that notion, that feels different to me. And it does feel juicy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love that. And, the metaphor that we've really dug into this year is grafting. And this idea, and, Kathy McShane gets all the credit for introducing this idea to us. And I think we've talked about it on other podcast episodes, so I'm not going to elaborate here. But the idea that you need a strong rootstock in order for the new thing to be grafted onto it and for it to truly bear new good fruit for a long time to come. And so, of course, the question is, what does it take to be a good rootstock? And I guess relating to congregations and to our conversation to this point, when I see congregations truly entering into discernment together, like they have the capacity to discern, which is not to say they get the smartest people in the room to make the best decision, right? That's not discernment. And Susan Beaumont, is quick to say that's not discernment. And I think in so many ways we've sort of lost the understanding of what discernment is in churches, in congregations, but it really is deeply spiritual, and it's listening for the Spirit, and it's taking time. But when congregations are doing that kind of holy discernment around their leadership tables, when opportunities come, when the new graft is there and available to graft onto, they say yes with joy. And
yeah,
that's the kind of fruit that when I see it, I go, oh man, that is good. That's really good. But it actually starts with that spiritual practice of long ago of discernment.
One of the most interesting stories I'm listening to right now it's an effort being led by a comparatively young minister named Shannon Fong in San Francisco at the San Francisco Contemplarium. And he has the audacity to be creating a place-based, neighborhood-based experience of contemplation and practice, mostly geared towards young adults, but that's more of a demographic reality in this part of San Francisco than it is a selective choice. And he is experimenting with the temple model from East Indian and Asian communities where temples are very place-based and almost everybody is welcome at them. And they're sort of shrines, they're local places that hold and invite contemplation and engagement with ritual life as individuals and as groups, that feed people, that are occupied by religious leaders that people can come to. The reason I'm uplifting this is I think it's an audacious choice to consider place as the center when we've been essentially telling ourselves a story that people don't cross thresholds. But what if they stayed within their neighborhoods and knew there was a beacon of spiritual and religious engagement within it that was uniquely theirs by virtue of where they lived and the fact that their neighbors are going? So this is an experiment I'm paying very careful attention to.
So Sue, as you share that story, I think how different that probably sounds to so many of our listeners. And in some ways, who are largely serving churches or attending churches. And in some ways, it harkens back to, kind of the beginning days, the forming days of communities. You'd have a church and a schoolhouse and the local hotel and whatever else and it was needed in that community, right? And so this very place-based, open, that's where the folks met for their town hall meetings and, in the church, but also to worship. And, there's all kinds of those vestiges that still live in New England, by the way. But also, okay, so, but we have become so kind of, segregated in how we think about our worship spaces, who's in, who's out, who belongs, who doesn't. We've got some ingrained practices around how we worship and who attends. And so when I think about this notion of leaning into new ways of being the church in a neighborhood, new ways of providing access, if you will, and you talk about this some in your paper, new ways of employing these ancient technologies, if you will. I think probably most leaders and churches are hitting against resistance of ingrained ways of being the church and understanding of what it means to be the church. And so I'm curious, we don't have to dissect all of what that means, but I would love for you all to talk about what are some of the things that folks ought to be thinking about, aware of, willing to put aside as they try to lean into a new way of employing these ancient technologies. That was a long lead in. Did the thread make sense? So, what if they're going to try something new? They're going to lean into what they believe is their calling, and they're going to try something new, and it's going to cause some shift. What should they be keeping in mind?
I think it's good you said cause some shift. It's going to cause shift. I want to make sure we're articulating that clearly. Change does cause some shift to come up.
Yes.
Yeah. So I just was making a joke, not intending to be the first to answer this question. But one thing that came to mind as you were talking about this, I'll tell you a big learning for me over the last 5 years has been this idea of design thinking, human-centered design thinking, which Sue, you reference in your article. And that was like a whole new concept to me 5 years ago. I had sort of been introduced to it, but it really opened my eyes to see in a new way. And so here's one way that is. I think often in leadership in the church, and certainly at the denominational levels, we see this of like, we got to get everybody in the room. We got to have everybody in the room, and we need representatives from everybody, every corner of every demographics of in every constituency in the church, fill in the blank, right? And so it ends up being a huge group of people. And it's really hard to design with a huge group like that has all their own sort of, roles they're bringing into this. We all know, I'm sure, I'm hoping listeners are nodding along. I mean, we've all been there. And so design thinking it starts with listening, right? And it's like you get the right people in the room, and it's maybe 10 people, but everybody comes having listened, and you together do a collective listening. And it's sort of understanding empathetically of what's going on and each of the needs of. So I just say that, and then from that kind of framework then of this intensive group of people who are doing this design thinking, I mean, you're not leaving people out, you're bringing them in the room in a way, but they're not actually in the room, people, right? So it is much more possible in that sort of framework to yield to something that's really a beautiful possibility, that you can truly design with humans centered in the center and come up with something that is meeting a need in a way, and that is truly spirit driven and spirit led. And so I guess I just want to offer that and encourage people to look at Sue's article that talks a little bit more about that design thinking, but that's what they're doing in the tech world, right? And so that's one of the technologies that I'm drawn to, at least in terms of gathering and organizing and inviting people around conversation. Sue, you gotta expand on this. Go. Help me.
Well, no, I really appreciate that framing so much, because there's when I think about the ways that most of the religious communities work that I've been a part of, they build for certain realities that serve us very poorly when we're trying to work in the wider world. And one of them is inclusion. Now, let me quickly offer a caveat. What I mean by that is everyone has a voice at the table, and we are going to have a lengthy process of discovering those voices, distilling them, trying to find consensus or common ground, and then building from the common ground. I believe that is crucial and vital to understand any group of people, any community, and to talk to the widest possible range of people. But not when it comes to building something. We need to learn everything we can, and then we need to go build stuff.
Yes.
And the building process should not at all be subject to the same rules and the same practices as the discernment and listening process does. Once that discernment and listening is over, I actually think having there's a reason that we talk about like rapid prototyping and just trying a lot of stuff and building over and over and over again, and then seeing what the result is and then moving on.
Yeah.
This kind of nimbleness is considered anathema to some of the fundamental things we say we care about at church. And this is part of why I think tech is a bit of a straw man in a lot of the religious worlds. It's because we put consensus, relationship, and community up against the practices of this kind of rigor I'll just use as a shorthand. And I just think that is a super, super lazy way of understanding the differences in paradigms. And I say lazy because we have a lot of really highly sophisticated work avoidance strategies in the religious world. And one of them is saying that we don't do things that way because people might get left out.
Right.
If I had $1 for every time I've been told that people might feel or be left out by a process. And listen, this is very, very real. We understand this. The only reason I can say this without shame is because of the amount of time and commitment I've invested in understanding how the things that I do affect people who have a wider story to tell. But I just want to say, I think we have to be more sophisticated on our understanding of building technologies as being about a fundamentally different thing. There's lots of ways to build accountability and relationship into building, but consensus is not among them.
Yeah. So that feels key. Like because you're not saying it's an either or, actually. You're saying you do the groundwork of the inclusion, the listening, the understanding people and where they are in the community, and you build from that. So it's not disconnected.
Yes.
But if we try to build with the same tools with which we listen and discern and connect, we won't ever actually get it built, right? Whatever the thing is, the new idea, the new method of showing up.
There's enough ministry for everybody. There's enough ministry to go around for the folks who are just truly gifted at community building and presencing and consensus making and engagement. That is phenomenal. Go do that.
Yeah.
But let's not assume those are the same skills and practices that are going to build at high volume, rapid stuff. Those are different sets of skills. And the folks who are called to that kind of ministry should do that kind of ministry unfettered from the constraints. And constraint is not a dirty word in my world at all. It's just like, it's the world we work in. When we choose to work in certain worlds, we choose to accept certain constraints. And quite frankly, those of us who try to beat our head against the constraints are only going to wind up bloody,
right,
and despairing. All to say, there's ministry enough for everybody. Let's understand these are different kinds and empower people to do those different kinds.
To do the different kinds.
Can I add one more thing here, which I think what we're talking about is the so important piece here is that, like, let's take it at a congregational level or even a nonprofit level. But this is the assumption here is that we're all clear on our vision and purpose as an organization, as a congregation. It's like we're all working towards something that's greater than any one of us, right? And I think that's the piece that, again, is fundamental, because if I'm part of this congregation and I know we're headed in this way and we all are, sort of bought in, supportive of a larger vision, then it's okay that I'm not on the design team here, because I know that it's all for this greater cause that we're a part of, right? And that really, when we talk about formation and leadership and the needs of leaders, and this is a whole nother conversation, but it's how do you get to that place of shared vision in a community, and from which all of this can happen,
Right. Enough that I believe in the mission and the purpose and the direction that I can step aside for this, that, or the other.
Right.
And I don't have to be part of every conversation or that kind of thing.
And I don't have to agree with every single thing that we do without putting my soul or someone else's at risk and using the language that suggests that it is.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
I hope this is one that we get some texture to as we continue during the season, because I think we're I really want congregations and congregational leaders to come away with not just what's hard, but what is possible. And so, during the season, I know we'll come back to these very kinds of issues. I want to circle back, though, Sue. You mentioned a favorite and painful term called work avoidance, and in your paper, you caution against over-relying on the Spirit to do the work that is actually ours. Can you say more about that?
Well, all the work is ours. And to say that all the work is ours can still coexist with the reality that God is doing her work as well, and the Holy Spirit is alive and roaming among us. But to say that all the work is ours is to say that we have hands and feet and we're meant to use them. And there are certain practices of thought that I think get in our way, that collectively I might term work avoidance. And I think one of them is a kind of capitulation to lazy strategizing and lazy thinking.
Mm.
And by that I mean we assume that spirit will speak the words we don't know how to say. We assume that spirit will reach people that we don't know how to reach. We assume that some longing in people that God has implanted will spring to life and begin to search for us, even though we're hiding in places people can't find. So there's a way that we tell a story that God is somehow responsible for these fundamental elements that are going to drive our success. And I just think that's not true. I just think it's not true. And now when I use words like lazy, it really sounds judgmental. And of course, I'm being provocative here. But one of the first lessons I learned in my new world, and I still learn it every day, and trust me, it's very, very hard to stay in the presence of, is basically like my abstraction as a minister and as a person who speaks pastorally about things is not helpful when we're building things.
Mm-hmm.
It actually does a disservice to the precision required to actually build. And I get challenged on that. Basically, it's like, could you say things we actually understand in ways that we actually understand it? So that's my version of the same problem. I expect by the sheer power of my rhetoric to inspire and influence my colleagues to do certain things, because it's like, I mean, of course they should. That's what happens in church. But in fact, I'm not building a bridge between their disciplines and my ideas. And that's just an example of the kind of lazy thinking I'm applying to myself, where I think if I say an inspirational thing,
right,
it's going to do all the work that's necessary to translate into actually making something. And it just doesn't.
Yeah.
Not even if you're working with the smartest people in the world. It just doesn't work that way. So that's an example.
Oh, yeah.
Help me to make that less abstract, y'all.
Okay, how about this? I'll try. So we have Digital Fellows whom you've met, and they spent, I think, 18 months at this point experimenting in the digital and physical spaces, right? And I think the temptation is, or the very culturally acceptable thing is to create cool videos and then find the right platform to get them in front of people, right? Or, just do the right TikTok with the right kind of angles. And I'm quickly, getting very clear that I'm not actually on TikTok, but you know what I mean? Like, you make cool videos and you distribute them to the crowd and then you're good, right? And but what they've learned and what I'm learning through them and what they're very convicted on is, of course, that's not it, right? It's not it. It's relational. It's communal. It's helping people to reach a depth of formation. This one-way street kind of thing isn't it. And so they're understanding their role much less as entertainer, if you will, or, this sort of perfect video putter together and distributor, and much more into, wait, how do I still create space for people to belong and be heard and known fully? And how do I invest in them, in their lives, in their formation? Does that land? Yeah.
Yes, that's a great example, because if they're just creating the cool video or whatever and getting it out there, they're doing, again, use the provocative word lazy, they're doing the lazy work of saying, and then God will do what God does out there. And it'll all be fine. I've done my part. As opposed to saying, wait, what is the deeper work here?
Yes.
And I would say it even goes back to the previous conversation we were having about, how do I say this? About the way we do our work and the, how trying to include everybody, if you will, then can kind of stop the building process or whatever. If the building process in this example is actually, how are we doing formation? How are we connecting people to each other? That's a different conversation than what are the needs of the people. You start there, and who are the people that we want to be in relationship with and such. But I guess what I'm saying is, so that's a really good practical example, I think, of some of these themes that we've been talking about. Yeah. All right, I'm going to wrap us up. And so a final question. What's a piece of ancient wisdom or practice that's shaping how you live or lead right now?
Well, we have a Ancestor table right when you walk in the door of our office down in the Presidio in San Francisco. And our office is in an old house, an officer's house there in the main post of the old base. And there's a gorgeous wooden table right when you walk in the door. And on that table exists the pictures from everyone on our team that when they arrive on our team, they choose a mentor, a teacher, a relative, a parent, a grandparent, uncles. And every day when we come in, the first person who comes in lights that candle. It's a vigil candle, tall. And every day, the last person who leaves puts it out. And so when I come in, I'm usually the first. And so I almost always have the honor of lighting that candle. And I literally spend a moment greeting the folks whose images I have put on that table. And of course, naming them, thanking them, and noticing the ancestors from my colleagues who now I feel like I know. It's such a profound grounding every day. So that's the practice that animates my work life every day. It's beautiful, and I cherish it.
Oh, Sue, that's so beautiful. I love that. And this is not answering the question. It's totally aside, just responding to you. But I've just been so drawn to ancestors lately. And we've often had that. I think it was Bishop Huey that introduced us to the question, what kind of ancestor do you want to be? And I think that's such a great question for, the church right now too. But we've watched Coco in my house with my 4-year-old, this wonderful Disney show, which very much brings the ancestors right to life. And so it's the theme of our holiday coming up. We're going to have everybody. We have a lot of neighbors coming, and the invitation is to make a dish from your ancestor and tell their story. So I'm also becoming much more attuned to the presence of ancestors. But I like your idea, and I'll be trying to incorporate that, Sue. I think my answer is walking, and I've been, I hate bringing it up like this because it sounds so, but my dissertation was on pilgrimage. So, she's always got to bring up her dissertation in these podcasts and this is when people stop listening. But which I very much understand, but I've always been drawn to pilgrimage, and there's something about that mind, body, spirit connection. And so for me to be, and I walk without my earbuds in. Now, sometimes I walk with them in. So if you see me, think, okay, she's not telling. So sometimes I listen to Pray As You Go, which is a wonderful meditation on the scripture that I highly recommend. But it's the art of walking in the neighborhood and really trying to be attentive to my body, which I can often ignore. And, putting myself in those sort of physical, spiritual mind spaces is really important to me. So, all right, Lisa, you have to answer too. You haven't answered yet, right? On this season? This is the first episode. So go, you got to answer.
Okay. Let's see. So my daily practice, it's how I start before I ever get out of bed, is that I do intercessory prayer. And so I have a constant list that's in my head. There's an order. We have a very big family. And so it's family. And then my circles of friends. And then you don't need all the details. But anyway, and then those prayers that are top of heart at the time. And so, so every single day it orients me to the goodness around me, the relationships, God who is present, and it's an offering up of those things that we cannot necessarily change, but we're holding in the light. So that's how I start my day, every day.
It's good.
It's an honor to be in the presence of your everyday practices and to be a part of the ministries that you've created out of those practices to serve the world.
It's great.
I feel the same way. What a gift this friendship and shared ministry is.
Amen.
Thank you both.
Thank you.